Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Dr. Gulrez Zahid. My topic for round 2 presentation is surgical management urologists EAU guidelines. I will start with table of contents. Diagnostic evaluation, summary of evidence and recommendations, extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy, its procedure, complication and recommendations, URS, RIRS procedure and complications, PCNL procedure indications and complications, indications for active removal of ureter stone, selection of procedure, recommendations, indications, treatment algorithm for ureter stone, indications for active stone removal of renal stones, recommendations, treatment algorithm for renal stones, laparoscopy and open surgery, its indications and recommendations, management of patients with residual stones, management of stones in patients with transplant kidneys. Now I will try to explain one by one, each of them one by one. Diagnostic evaluation. Diagnostic imaging. The most appropriate imaging modality will be determined by the clinical situation, which will differ depending on if a ureter or a renal stone is suspected. Standard evaluation includes a detailed medical history and physical examination. Patients with ureter stone usually present with loin pain, vomiting, and sometimes fever, but may also be asymptomatic. Immediate evaluation is indicated in patients with solitary kidney, fever, or when there is doubt regarding a diagnosis of renal colic. Ultrasound should be used as the primary diagnostic imaging tool, although pain relief or any other emergency measures should not be delayed by imaging assessments. Ultrasound is safe, reproducible, and inexpensive. It can identify stones located in the calyces, pelvis, piloureteric, and vesicoureteric junctions, as well as in patients with upper urinary tract dilations. Ultrasound has a sensitivity of 45% and specificity of 94% for ureter stones, and sensitivity of 45% and specificity of 88% for renal stones. The sensitivity and specificity of KUB is 44 to 77%. Kidney ureter bladder radiography should not be performed if non-contrast CT is being considered. However, it is helpful in differentiating between radiolucent and radiopaque stones and should be used for comparison during follow-up. Evaluation of patients with acute flank pains and non-contrast enhanced computed tomography has become the standard for diagnosing acute flank pain and has replaced IVU. Non-contrast enhanced CT can determine stone diameter and density. When stones are absent, the cause of abdominal pain should be identified. In evaluating patients with suspected acute urolithiasis, non-contrast CT is significantly more accurate than IVU. Non-contrast enhanced CT can detect uric acid and xanthine stones, which are radiolucent on plain films, but not indeni weir stones. Non-contrast enhanced CT can determine stone density, inner structure of the stone, skin to stone distance, and surrounding anatomy, all of which affect selection of treatment modality. The advantage of non-contrast imaging must be balanced against loss of information on renal function and urinary collecting system anatomy, as well as high radiation dose.
Now, just a moment. Okay, you just complete this second slide and then I'll come back.
Yes, sir. Radiation risk can be reduced by low dose CT, which may, however, be difficult to introduce in standard clinical practice. In patients with a body mass index less than 30, low dose CT has been shown to have a sensitivity of 86% for detecting ureter stones, less than 3 mm, and 100% for calculi above 3 mm. MA of prospective studies has shown that low dose CT diagnosed urolithiasis with a pooled sensitivity of 93.1% and a specificity of 96.6%. Dual energy CT can differentiate uric acid containing stone from calcium containing stones. Sir.
Right. So you see, this is a great change and a major change in our diagnostic workup. Of all the investigations which are important, the most important was X-ray IVU, particularly in the previous century, in the last 2 decades. Because what we'd want to know from any imaging modality is not only the presence of a stone, but also its location, in which part of the kidney the stone is present. It can be seen on an ultrasound, but more precisely on X-ray IVU. Plus, what X-ray IVU was giving us is something called the function of the kidney, and the contrast, which is not only being picked up by the kidney, but is concentrated and excreted. So whenever there is a hold up, whenever there is something which is causing the kidney to function less, we always can infer from seeing the films of serial films of X-ray IVU. Now these things can be plus other things can also be picked up by non-contrast CT scan. So there has been some kind of a debate earlier why we should change our practice of going from one diagnostic modality towards the other, but now everything is clear, and we are going further in the direction of non-contrast CT by decreasing the dose of radiation so that it is applicable to a lot of different conditions or comorbidities which are present in the patient. For instance, the patient might be, as you have mentioned, having a BMI of less than 30 or more than 30, plus what the condition might be there is something called, for instance, pregnancy with the presence of a stone and urethral colic, and in that patient you want to have a thing that can cone down and reduce the dose of radiation so that what you need is available to you. And with need, what I mean is to have the presence or absence of a stone, the cause of the colicky pain, and particularly the treatment that you want to suggest to that patient according to the stone presence and its composition, for instance. So what CT scan is giving you in addition to X-ray IVP is, first of all, there is no contrast, so the radiation hazards and the hypersensitivity reactions of a contrast is not there. The second is there is low dose of radiation. The third is the presence of a stone, the density of the stone. These two things can be measured to an extent that can affect your selection of a treatment modality. So we are now in an era where X-ray IVU is still there in our say practice, but we are going almost entirely towards CT scan and non-contrast CT scan. So this is something which has to be studied, for instance, X-ray IVU, but again your concentration should be towards CT scan and its various say modifications in the technique of how this CT non-contrast CT can be done, should be done, so that whatever you want to know can be there. For instance, what I want to stress at this point is a dose of CT, a dose of radiation which is involved in non-contrast CT can be the same for a lot of people, but you can vary it according to the physiological condition of the patient and according to BMI that is there. So there are a lot of things that can be done tailor-made, meaning to say whoever is the patient in front of you, you can minimize the radiation dose, and whatever you want to know about the question in your mind, whether the stone is present or not, whether it is translucent or radiolucent or radio opaque. What is the kind of density the stone has, the size of the stone, for instance. A stone which is less than 3 millimeter cannot be seen on X-ray KUV or X-ray IVP. Again, it cannot be seen on a CT scan also, but there is something which is which can be seen on a CT scan more than a plain KUV or an X-ray IVP, and that is in the range of above 3 millimeter and between 6 millimeters and 3 millimeters. So it has got a lot of benefit, but again there is a limit. Any stone which has got a density of less than or between 100 to 400 Hounsfield units, again there is a question whether it can be picked up by a non-contrast CT or it cannot be picked up by a non-contrast CT. So anything which is below 100 Hounsfield unit, again it cannot be picked up by a CT scan even. So this is a very interesting phase of development of this science of diagnostics, and I think we all should be in pace with whatever is happening around the world, because this thing can be done easily without any further investment in technology, but our radiologists have to be with us so that they can change a little in the protocol which is there in the machines, for instance the CT scan machines. So they have to change a little bit of the software, just manipulate it, and then it can be done very easily. Yes, please.
Radiological evaluation of patients with renal stones. IVU can provide information about renal function, the anatomy of the collecting system, and the level of an obstruction, while CT allows for rapid 3D data acquisition, including information on stone size and density, skin to stone distance, and surrounding anatomy, but at the cost of increased radiation exposure. Low dose and ultra low dose protocols seem to yield comparable results to standard dose protocols, with the exception of detection of very small stones in obese patients. A small randomized study shows that in supine percutaneous antegrade uteroscopy, PNL, preoperative planning using CT compared to IVU resulted in easier access and shorter operating time. In case stone removal is planned and the renal collecting system needs to be assessed, a contrast study should be performed. Summary of evidence. Non-contrast enhanced CT is used to confirm stone diagnosis in patients with acute flank pain, as it is superior to IVU. Enhanced CT enables 3D reconstruction of the collecting systems as well as measurement of stone density and skin to skin stone distance. Following are the recommendations. Immediate imaging is indicated with fever or solitary kidney, and when diagnosis is doubtful, use non-contrast enhanced CT to confirm stone diagnosis in patients with acute flank pain following initial ultrasound assessment. Perform a contrast study if stone removal is planned and the anatomy of the renal collecting system needs to be assessed. Diagnostics. Metabolism related. Beside imaging, each emergency patient with urolithiasis needs a second biochemical workup of urine and blood besides imaging. At this point, no distinction is made between high and low risk patients for stone formation. Basic laboratory analysis, non-emergency urolithiasis patients. Biochemical workup is similar for all stone patients, however, if more intervention is planned, examination of sodium, potassium, C-reactive proteins, and blood coagulations time can be omitted. This is a chart. Basic laboratory analysis, emergency urolithiasis patients. In urine, we perform the following test. Dipstick test of spot urine sample For red cells, white cells, nitrites, approximate urine pH and urine microscopy or culture. Serum blood sample, we check for creatinine, uric acid, ionized calcium, sodium, potassium, blood cell count, and C-reactive proteins. Perform a population test, partial thromboplastin time, and international normalized ratio if intervention is likely or planned. Perform stone analysis in first-time formers using a variant procedure, X-ray diffraction or infrared spectroscopy. Repeat stone analysis in patients presenting with recurrent stones despite drug therapy, early recurrence after complete stone clearance, late recurrence after a long stone-free period because stone compositions may change.
Now, just to give you the picture that we have here in an SIUT, all those patients who have been operated here, regardless of the fact that whether somebody has ordered for chemical composition of the stone or not, every stone that has been operated and taken out, if it is not sent or it is sent, it is for 100% of cases the stone is sent to the laboratory and they do infrared spectroscopy for all those stones. Now the thing is, sometimes the person who has operated on a patient is not able to see that patient in the outpatient clinic, in the post-op clinic. And also the report which is there in the laboratory is not followed up or is not taken up, and then it is not there in the file. So this is the missing link in the whole circuit. Since we work in a hospital, we have to follow certain rules and guidelines, but if there is no policy, then again there has to be an audit, and then there has to be a re-audit, and then we improve upon our practice. So this is something which is already there. It has to be put into the circuit again, and then it will have its effect on the prognosis of the disease as well as on patient counseling thereafter. What I'm stressing at this point is, since you are coming into this very soon into this process of investigation, diagnosis, treatment, and then following up of your patients, we'll be changing a little. Again, whenever some new person or some new group comes into the hospital, there is always a change in practice. That change can be, again, can be expected, or it is something which can be seen, or it is sensed, or sometimes it is something which happens on its own and nobody sees it, that there is some change. But what my belief is, whenever some new blood comes into the system, there is always a change, and that change, if guided properly and understood properly by somebody who is within the system, then it is beneficial for everybody, and more so for the system. So with your presence in the coming months and years, I think this loop has to be again reinforced. What I can tell you is, everybody who has been through the procedure and the stone is taken out, there is a report which is ready, but you have to take that report into consideration and then follow the patient forward. If nobody does it, then again your purpose of doing a stone clinic, for instance, is not completely understood, right? So I think whenever somebody wants to learn something, read a chapter, always think that there has to be something which you can change. There has to be some contribution which you can make, and no system in the world is something which is an ideal system and there is no room for change. There is always a room for change. Now this needs a little bit of criticism. So what I'm doing right now is criticizing myself, my system, the system in which I was working for the last 30 years. So this is a guide or an indication for you guys to do something, and you can do it. You can do it for the betterment of again patients, and these are our patients. So all patients are our patients, and we should be obsessed about them. Yes, please.
Diagnostic imaging during pregnancy. In pregnant women, radiation exposure may cause non-stochastic teratogenesis or stochastic carcinogenesis or mutagenesis effects. Teratogenic effects are cumulative with increasing dose and require a threshold dose less than 50 milligauss, is considered as safe, and depends on the gestation age, minimum risk prior to 8th week and after 23rd week. Carcinogenesis dose even less than 10 milligauss presents a risk, and mutagenesis 500 to 1000 milligauss doses are required, far in excess of the doses in common radiographic studies. Get worse with increasing dose, but they do not require a dose threshold and are not dependent on the gestational age. There is no imaging modality that should be routinely repeated in pregnant women. Scientific societies and organizations agree on the safety of the diagnostic evaluation when ultrasound, X-ray imaging, and MRI are used as and when indicated. A radiographic procedure should not be withheld from a pregnant woman if the procedure is clearly indicated and doing so will affect her medical care. It is generally recommended that an investigation resulting in an absorbed dose to the fetus of greater than 0.5 milligray requires justification. Ultrasound has become the primary radiological diagnostic tool when evaluating pregnant patients suspected of renal colic. However, normal physiological changes in pregnancy can mimic ureteral obstruction. MRI can be used as a second-line procedure to define the level of urinary tract obstruction and to visualize stones as a filling defect. As 3 Tesla, MRI has not been evaluated in pregnancy. The use of 1.5 Tesla is currently recommended. The use of gadolinium is not routinely recommended in pregnancy to avoid toxic effects to the embryo. For the detection of uric acid during pregnancy, low-dose CT is associated with a high positive predictive value, 95.8%, compared to MRI 80% and ultrasound 77%. As per White, low-dose CT offers improved diagnostic accuracy that can avoid negative interventions such as ureteroscopy. Although low-dose CT protocols reduce the radiation exposure, judicious use is currently recommended in pregnant women as a last line option.
You go back to the last slide, the previous one. Yes. You see, when you see our reports and the CT scan films, it is not the gray which is written over there. It is actually small m, capital S, and capital V, meaning to say it is sieverts or millisieverts.
Yes.
So normally what we do, I don't know whether this is a practice in other centers also. We have to check with the radiation oncologists. The radiation which is used for therapeutic purposes, they use this gray scale and this unit of gray. What we use for diagnostic purpose, the radiation dose is sieverts, but there is no difference. 1 gray is equal to 1 sievert, and 1 milligray is equal to 1 millisievert. So it's the same. For instance, if you the last sentence, it is generally recommended that an investigation resulting in an absorbed dose to the fetus of greater than 0.5 milligray requires justification. So it can be 0.5 millisieverts, right? So there is no difference, just a difference of I think the unit is the same. But if you want to have something again, there is another system of measurement, and that is known as rads. So it is, I think, 1 gray is equal to 100 rads, something like this. Right, please continue.
Management of sepsis and or anguria in obstructive kidney. The obstructive kidney will, with all signs of UTI and or anguria, is a urological emergency. Urgent decompression is often necessary to prevent further complications in infected hydronephrosis secondary to stone-induced unilateral or bilateral renal obstruction. Currently, there are two options for urgent decompression of obstructive collecting systems. Number one, placement of an indwelling ureteral stent. Number two, percutaneous placement of a nephrostomy tube. There is little evidence to support the superiority of percutaneous nephrostomy over retrograde stenting for primary treatment of infected hydronephrosis. There is no good quality evidence to suggest that ureteral stenting has more complications than percutaneous nephrostomy. Only one random controlled testing compared different modalities of decompression of acute infected hydronephrosis. The complications of percutaneous nephrostomy insertion have been reported consistently, but those of ureteral stent insertion are less well described. Definitive stone removal should be delayed until the infection is cleared following a complete course of antimicrobial therapy. A small RCT shows the feasibility of immediate ureteroscopic stone removal combined with an appropriate antibiotic regimen, however at the cost of longer hospital stay and higher analgesic requirements.
Now, I have got a little, say, objection to this statement that there is little evidence to support the superiority of percutaneous nephrostomy over retrograde stenting for primary treatment of infected hydronephrosis. You see, that since this is a guideline from the European, say, perspective, so it might be possible that their antibiogram and their social conditions are different from us, and they have proposed this kind of a statement. But normally, what we classify this kind of a disease aspect is placement of an indwelling ureteral stent and percutaneous placement of nephrostomy tube. One is the internal stenting, the other one is the external stenting. The kind of situation that we have is, for instance, you have done your investigation and you have selected your patient for PCNL, for instance, and there is a 2.5 centimeter stone in the renal pelvis. Now, with all the evidences that you have before you operate, nothing is telling you that this system has got pus in it. But what you do, whenever you puncture the system, the very initial puncture, what comes out of the needle of the sheath is pus. Now, here comes two different systems: European kind of perspective of dealing such patients, and ours, that is Asian. What we do is we don't proceed with the procedure. If we see pus coming out of the tract, we put in a PCN and we abandon the procedure till such time that everything settles down, infection has gone away, and maybe after 2 weeks or 1 week or so, under antibiotic cover, we take advantage of this nephrostomy tube and the nephrostomy tract. We remove the tube, we put in a sheath and do our procedure. So that's the kind of situation and the way that we do in our setting. What they do in, for instance, Germany or in Austria and other places in Europe, they don't abandon their procedure. They wait for a little while in the same setting. They drain out everything which is there in the kidney, meaning to say all the pus, and when the pus is clear, they just proceed with the procedure. They do away the breakage of the stone, and they just remove the stone and then put in a nephrostomy tube, and the procedure is over. But what we have seen in our case is, if we have done it this way, we have got something called septicemia in our hands to deal with. Now, there has been a debate whether we should be like them, doing the case like they have been doing, or but the thing is, what is in our mind is actually the patient safety. We are more concerned about the virulence of organisms here in our setup. We are again skeptical a little bit of the nursing care that we can do. We can't put every patient who has been through a PCNL on a post-op intensive care unit, closely following these patients whether they do develop septicemia or not. So we have got a lot of different aspects of post-operative setup and post-operatively dealing with these patients. So rather than doing something which is kind of an adventure, we always take a little, say, a step back, and then we give time for everything to settle on its own. Not on its own, but rather with antibiotic therapy. And when everything is cleared, then we go one step up. So this is the way that we do our case here. We can't just say that percutaneous nephrostomy has got no role. It has got a role. It has got a very big role, because our system or our population is too different from their population. We have got a large stone burden. We have got a lot of people who have been victim of obstructive nephropathy for a very long time, and we have got a lot of patients who come to us at a very later stage of their disease. So ours is a different experience from them. So we have to again read the whole guideline again with a pinch of salt. Yes, please.
Further measures following urgent decompression of the obstructed and infected urinary collecting system. Both urine and blood samples should be sent for culture, antibiogram, sensitivity testing, and antibiotics should be initiated immediately. Thereafter or continued if initiated prior to testing. The regimen should be re-evaluated in the light of the culture antibiogram results. Although clinically well accepted, the impact of the second antibiogram test on treatment outcome has not yet been evaluated. Intensive care might become necessary. Now we will discuss first procedure, extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy. The success of SWL depends on the efficacy of the lithotripter and the following factors: size, location and composition of the stones, patient's habitus, and performance of SWL. Each of these factors significantly influences the treatment rate and final outcome of SWL. Best clinical practice: stenting routine, use of internal stents before SWL does not improve stone-free rates, nor lowers the number of auxiliary treatments. It may, however, reduce formation of stent rates. Pacemaker. Patients with a pacemaker can be treated with SWL provided that appropriate technical precautions are taken. Patients with implanted cardioverter defibrillators must be managed with special care, filing more temporary reprogrammed during SWL treatment. However, this might not be necessary with a new generation lithotripters. Shockwave rate. Lowering shockwave frequency from 120 to 60 to 90 shock waves per minute improves stone-free rates. Tissue damage increases with shock wave frequency, number of shock waves, energy setting, and repeat treatment sessions. The number of shock waves that can be delivered at each session depends on the type of lithotripter and shock wave power. There is no consensus on the maximum number of shock waves. Starting SWL on a lower energy setting with stepwise power, ramping can achieve vasoconstriction during treatment, which prevents renal injury. Animal studies have shown better SFRs using stepwise power ramping, fragmentation, or evidence of complications after SWL, irrespective of whether ramping was used. There are no conclusive data on the intervals required between repeated SWL sessions. However, clinical experience indicates that the repeat sessions are feasible within 1 day for ureteral stones. Improvement of acoustic coupling, proper acoustic coupling between the cushion of the treatment head and the patient's skin is important. Defects: air pockets in the coupling gel deflect 99% of shock waves. Ultrasound gel is probably the most widely used agent available as a lithotripsy coupling agent. Procedural control. Results of treatment are operator dependent and experienced clinicians obtain better results. During the procedure, careful imaging control of localization contributes to outcome quality. Pain control. Careful control of pain during treatment is necessary to limit pain-induced movements and excessive respiratory exertions. Antibiotic prophylaxis. No standard antibiotic prophylaxis before SWL is recommended. However, prophylaxis is recommended in the case of internal stent placement ahead of anticipated treatments and in the presence of increased bacterial burden, that is, indwelling catheter, nephrostomy tube, or infectious stones. Medical therapy after ESWL. In spite of conflicting results, most RCTs and several MAs support medical expulsion therapy after SWL for ureteral or renal stones as adjunct to expedite expulsion and to increase stone-free rates. Medical expulsion therapy might also reduce analgesic requirements. Post-treatment management. Mechanical percussion and diuretic therapy can significantly improve SFRs and accelerate stone passage after SWL. Complications of SWL compared to PNL and URS, there are fewer overall complications with SWL. These are the complications related to stone fragments. Centrase 4 to 7%, regrowth of residual fragments 21 to 59%, renal colic 2 to 4%, infectious bacteriuria in non-infectious stones 7.7 to 23%, sepsis 1 to 2.7%. In tissue effects, renal hematoma symptomatic less than 1%, hematoma formation asymptomatic 4 to 19%. Cardiovascular effects, dysarrhythmias in 11 to 59%. GIT, bowel perforation cases are reported. Same with liver spleen hematoma.
Now this word Steinstrasse, this is a German word. This is a German word. So if you go to Germany and if you want to go to any place, so there has to be a name of that road. So actually Strasse is something which is a street. So if you go to, for instance, Berlin Street, then it is Berlin Strasse. Like similarly, Stein is pronounced as Stein, and Stein is basically something called stone. So if you just combine both these things, then it becomes Stone Street. All right. So this is something of an interest to those who want to study semantics, for instance. Right. Please proceed.
Recommendations. ESWL. Ensure correct use of coupling agent because this is crucial for effective shock wave transportation. Maintain careful fluoroscopic or ultrasonographic monitoring during shock wave lithotripsy. Use proper analgesia because it improves treatment results by limiting pain-induced movements and excessive respiratory exertions. Prescribe antibiotics prior to SWL in the case of infected stone or bacteria. Now, I will tell about URS, retrograde and antegrade, and RIRS. The current standard for rigid ureteroscope is a tip diameter of less than 8 French. Rigid URS can be used for the whole ureter. However, technical improvements as well as the availability of digital scopes also favor the use of flexible ureteroscopes in the ureter. Percutaneous antegrade removal of ureter stones is a consideration in selected cases, that is large, greater than 15 mm impacted proximal ureter calculi in dilated renal collecting system, or when the ureter is not amenable to retrograde manipulation. Ureteroscopy for renal stones. Technical improvements include endoscopic miniaturization, improved deflection mechanism, enhanced optical quality and tools, and introduction of disposables have led to an increased use of URS for both renal and ureter stones. Major technological progress has been achieved for RIRS. A recent systemic review addressing renal stones greater than 2 cm showed a cumulative stone-free rates of 91% with 1.45 procedures per patient. 4.5% of the complications were greater than Clavin-Dindy grade 3. Digital scopes demonstrate shorter operation times due to improvements in image quality. Stones that cannot be extracted directly must be disintegrated. If it is difficult to access stones within the lower renal pole that need disintegration, it may help to displace them into a more accessible calyx. Best clinical practice in ureteroscopy. Access to the upper urinary tract. Most interventions are performed under general anesthesia, although local or spinal anesthesia is possible. Intravenous sedation is suitable for female patients with distal ureteral stones. Antegrade URS is an option for large impacted proximal ureteral calculi. Safety aspects. Uroscopic equipments must be available in the odds ratio. We recommend placement of a safety wire, even though some groups have demonstrated that URS can be performed without it. Balloon and plastic dilators should be available if necessary. Prior rigid URS can be helpful for optical dilatation followed by flexible URS if necessary. If ureteral access is not possible, insertion of a JJ stent followed by URS after 7 to 14 days offers an alternative. Bilateral URS during the same session is feasible, resulting in equivalent to lower SFRs but slightly higher overall complication rates. Mostly minor Clavin-Dindy grade 1 and grade 2.
Now, a word about safety guide wire. The time when this safety guide wire was introduced into urology, now that was the day when urology was actually modernized. This safety guide wire is something which is of importance in a lot of different areas, in interventional cardiology as well. There was a person, and I think he is still living. He is, I think, in Denmark or Belgium, and his name is Lunderquist. Now, he invented this guide wire having one end a floppy tip and the other end which is something which is hard. So this guide wire has got its own caliber. It is like 0.038 inch or 0.032 inch. So these are two different calibers of the guide wire. Now, this guide wire is used to access a lot of different areas. For instance, what we are interested in is to place something from the percutaneous point into the kidney. So we need a track. We want to make a track, and then this guide wire will always guide us towards making a track in in consonance with the guide wire. So that technique is known as the Seldinger technique. Now this same Seldinger technique is used whenever we want to access something from down up, meaning to say from urethra into the bladder, into the ureteric orifice, and then into ureter and up into the kidney pelvic system. So this guide wire has got a very big role to play in modern day urology and particularly in endourology. So I have posted one article, the history of guide wire, to your WhatsApp group, and I think it is very interesting to read about it, because this is something from where we have advanced too quickly to another dimension in urology. Yes, please.
Ureteral access sheets. Hydrophilic coated ureteral access sheets, which are available in different calibers, can be inserted via guide wire with the tip placed in the proximal ureter. Ureteral access sheets allow easy multiple access to the UUT and therefore significantly facilitates URS. The use of ureteral access sheets improve vision by establishing a continuous outflow, decreases intrarenal pressure, and potentially reduce operating time. The insertion of ureteral access sheets may lead to ureteral damage. The risk is lowest in presented systems. No data on long-term side effects are available. Whilst larger cohorts series showed no difference in SFRs and ureteral damage, they did show lower post-operative infectious complications. Use of ureteral access sheets depends on the surgeon's preference. Stone extraction. The aim of URS is complete stone removal. Dust and wound strategies should be limited to the treatment of large renal stones. Stones can be extracted by endoscopic forceps or baskets. Only baskets made of nitinol can be used for flexible URS. Intercorporeal lithotripsy. The most effective lithotripsy system is the holmium, yttrium, aluminium garnet laser, which is currently the optimum standard for URS and flexible nephroscopy, because it is effective in all stone types. Pneumatic and URS systems can be used with high disintegration efficacy in rigid URS. However, stone migration into the kidney is a common problem, which can be prevented by a placement of special anti-migration tools proximal to the stone. Medical expression therapy following POG-YAG laser lithotripsy increases SFRs and reduce colic episodes. Standing before and after URS. Routine stenting is not necessary before URS. However, pre-stenting facilitates ureteroscopic management of stones, improves the SFRs, and reduce intraoperative complications. Randomized prospective trials have found that routine stenting after uncomplicated URS is not necessary. Stenting might be associated with high post-operative morbidity and cost. A ureter catheter with a short indwelling time, one day, may also be used with similar results. Stents should be inserted in patients who are at increased risk of complications, for example, ureteral trauma, residual fragments, bleeding, perforation, UTIs, or pregnancy. And in all doubtful cases, to avoid stressful emergencies. The ideal duration of stenting is not known. Most urologists favors 1 to 2 weeks after URS. Alpha blockers reduce the morbidity of ureteral stents and increase tolerability. Complications of ureteroscopy. The overall complication rate after URS is 9 to 25%. Most complications are minor and do not require intervention. Ureteral avulsion and strictures are rare, less than 1%. Previous perforations are the most important risk factor for complications. These are the recommendations. Use holmium, yttrium, aluminium garnet, laser lithotripsy for flexible ureteroscopy. Perform stone extraction only under direct endoscopic visualizations of the stone. Do not insert a stent in uncomplicated cases. Pre-stenting facilitates URS and improves outcome of URS, in particular for renal stones. Offer medical expulsive therapy for patients suffering from stent-related symptoms and after cardiac laser lithotripsy to facilitate the passage of fragments. Use percutaneous antegrade removal of ureteral stones as an alternative when shock wave lithotripsy is not indicated or has failed, and when the upper urinary tract is not amenable to retrograde URS. Use flexible URS in case where percutaneous nephrotomy or SWL are not an option, even for stones greater than 2 cm. However, in this case, there is a high risk that a follow-up procedure and placement of uterus stent may be needed.
Now, I have got a word about this slide. You see, whenever you want to study a subject, as you are doing it right now, and this is for the first time that you are studying it, so your mind can tell you that there are a lot of things on the table. For instance, by that what I mean is, for any novice, any person who is new to the subject, how can you decide whether this is a case for stenting or not stenting? How can you decide whether your patient needs something called flexible URS, or it can be done with ESWL? So there are many points that have to be there at the back of somebody who wants to decide. So how the learning process goes, how this training of a new surgeon or a new clinician goes, to my understanding, what since I have been through the same process earlier, I was always be in, or anybody who happens to be of my age goes through the same process of reading something in the book, just keeping it in the memory that yes, there are many things that have to be selected from, and particularly there is a patient who has got maybe a BMI of greater than 30 or less than 30. Maybe a stone is 2 cm, maybe it is below 2 or above 2 cm. So there are variations in actual practice. So the second level of understanding and second level of teaching and training, which is unconventional, is seeing your seniors, how do they select procedures one from the other, for one patient and the other patient. So this is known as something which is a clinical judgment, and it comes after a very long time. Sometimes it comes at a very early stage, depending upon the experience of the person. So there is no hard and fast rule that you have to be in the system for 5 years or 10 years and then you will be able to decide. But yes, it needs a little bit of time so that everything is there at the back of your mind, and then you have been through a lot of cases, you have seen a lot of cases, maybe you have done a lot of cases also, and seen through your experience, personal experience, that no, you want to stent in all cases, no matter what happens. This is no criteria of 2 cm or whatever. So this is your personal experience, and actually the surgeon's experience is something which is guided by fear of a surgeon. So we are always fearful of something which turns in a different direction, something which is not something that is expected. So all these things, they do accumulate in your memory, and that is what experience is. So I was against using guidelines in the very first reading of the subject by any junior person. Why? Because it gives you a wrong impression that you have to be very rigid in selecting your patient going towards one direction or the other. Guidelines have to be studied after a long time. Long time means after something which is called as introduction of the subject, and something which is known as actual taste of what the reality is, and then maybe at the end of your residency, just before your final pass out, you'll be able to just run through all those guidelines. Then you'll be able to understand that what are those different situations in which your patient land up in front of you, and then you are in a fix that what your compatriots are doing in the world which is beyond your center, how do they practice and what is the standard practice. So in order to refer to something, that is what the guideline is. The guideline is not something to be studied at the very first instance, but what we are doing at the moment is we are actually dealing with the subject as it is. In the first round we have seen it through a different angle. In the second round we are doing it in deeper areas of the same subject, so that everything should be in front of you. But with one word of caution, when you start your practice, when you start your application of knowledge very soon, please do not start with something called guidelines. This is some advice, and it is not advice which is from a textbook. It is an advice which is a friendly advice, because I don't want anybody to be misled, misguided. Life is just like a fluid. So you have to be with it. There are many variations beyond these what has been written here. So please be with your training process. Don't guide yourself or train yourself in a manner in which you have got very little for your patients. You should have a lot of variations whenever you want to practice alone, independently, and that is the time when you pass out from the system. So it needs a little bit of time to understand everything. Yes, please.
PCNL, percutaneous nephrothoractomy, remains the standard procedure for large renal calculi. Different rigid and flexible endoscopes are available, and the selection is mainly based on the surgeon's own preference. Standard access tracks are 24 to 30 F. Smaller access sheets, less than 18, were initially introduced for pediatric use but are now increasingly utilized in the adult population. Contraindications: patients receiving anticoagulant therapy must be monitored carefully pre and post-operatively. Anticoagulant therapy must be discontinued before PNL. Other important contraindications includes untreated UTI, tumor in the presumptive access tract area, potential malignant kidney tumor, and pregnancy. Best clinical practice: intracorporeal lithotripsy. Several methods of intracorporeal lithotripsy during PNL are available. Ultrasonic and pneumatic systems are most commonly used for rigid nephroscopy, whilst laser is increasingly used for miniaturized instruments. Flexible endoscopes also require laser lithotripsy to maintain tip deflection, with the Kodiak laser having become the standard. Preoperative imaging. Pre-procedure imaging evaluations are summarized, in particular ultrasound or CT of the kidney and the surrounding structures can provide information regarding interpositions organs within the planned percutaneous path. For example, spleen, liver, large bowel, duodenum. Positioning of the patient. Both prone and supine positions are equally safe, although the supine position confers some advantages. It depends on the appropriate equipment being available to position the patient correctly. For example, X-ray devices and an operative table. Most studies cannot demonstrate an advantage of supine PNL in terms of OR time. Prone positions offers more options for puncture and is therefore preferred for upper hole or multiple accesses. On the other hand, supine position allows simultaneous retrograde access to the collecting system using flexible ureteroscope. Puncture. Although fluoroscopy is the most common intraoperative imaging method, the additional use of ultrasound reduces radiation exposure. Preoperative CT or intraoperative ultrasound allows identification of the tissue between the skin and the kidney and lowers the incidence of visceral injury. The calcium puncture may be done under direct visualization using simultaneous flexible URS. Dilatation of the percutaneous access tract can be achieved using a metallic telescope, single dilators, or a balloon dilator. Although there are papers demonstrating that single-step dilation is equally effective as other methods, the difference in outcomes is most likely related to surgeons' experience rather than to the technology used. Choice of instruments. The urolithiasis panel performed a systemic review assessing the outcomes of PNL using smaller tract sizes, less than 22 F mini PNL, for removing renal calculi. Stone-free rates were comparable in miniaturized and standard PNL procedures. Procedures performed with small instruments tend to be associated with significantly lower blood loss, but the duration of procedure tends to be significantly longer. There were no significant differences in any other complications. However, the quality of the evidence was poor, with only 2 RCTs, and the majority of the remaining studies were single-arm case series only. Furthermore, the tract sizes used and type of stones treated were heterogeneous, therefore the risk of bias and confounding were high. Nephrostomy and stents. The decision of whether or not to place a nephrostomy tube at the conclusion of the PNL procedure depends on several factors, including presence of residual stones, likelihood of a second look procedure, significant intraoperative blood loss, urine extravasation, ureteral obstruction, potential persistent bacteria due to infected stones, solitary kidney, bleeding diathesis, and planned percutaneous chemolithiasis. Small bore nephrostomies seem to have advantages in terms of post-operative pain. Tubeless PNL is performed without a nephrostomy tube when neither a nephrostomy tube nor a ureter stent is introduced. The procedure is known as totally tubeless PNL. In uncomplicated cases, the latter procedure results in a shorter hospital stay with no disadvantages reported. Complications of PCNL. A systemic review of almost 12,000 patients shows the incidence of complications associated with PNL: fever 10.8%, 10.8%, transfusion 7%, thoracic complications 1.5%, sepsis in less than 1.5%, organ injury 0.4%, embolization 0.4%, urinoma 0.2%, and death in 0.05%. Perioperative fever can occur even with a sterile preoperative urinary culture and perioperative antibiotic prophylaxis because the renal stones themselves may be a source of infection. Intraoperative renal stone culture may therefore help to select post-operative antibiotics. Intraoperative irrigation pressure less than 30 mmHg and unobstructed post-operative urinary drainage may be important factor in preventing post-operative sepsis. Bleeding after PNL may be treated by briefly clamping of the nephrostomy tubes. Superselective embolic occlusion of the arterial branch may become necessary in the case of severe bleeding. This is summary of evidence and guidelines for endourology techniques for renal stones removal. Summary of evidence. Imaging of the kidney with ultrasound or CT can provide information regarding interpositions organs with the planned percutaneous path, that is spleen, liver, large bowel, pleura, and lung. Both prone and supine positions are equally safe, but neither has proven advantage in operating time or SFRs. Percutaneous nephrothoracmy formed with small instrument tend to be associated with significantly lower blood loss, but the duration of procedure tended to be significantly longer. There are no significant differences in SFRs or any other complications. In uncomplicated cases, a totally tubeless PNL results in a shorter hospital stay with no increase in complication rates. These are the recommendations. For PNL, perform pre-procedural imaging, include contrast medium where possible or retrograde study when starting the procedure. to assess stone comprehensiveness and anatomy of the collecting system to ensure safe access to the renal stone. Perform a tubeless without an nephrostomy tube or totally tubeless without nephrostomy tube and ureter stent percutaneous nephrectomy procedure in uncomplicated cases. These are the general recommendations and precautions for stone removal. Antibiotic therapy. Urinary tract infections should always be treated if stone removal is planned. In patients with clinically significant infection and obstruction, drainage should be performed for several days before starting stone removal. A urine culture or urinary microscopy should be performed before treatment. Perioperative antibiotic prophylaxis for prevention of infection following URS and percutaneous stone removal. No clear-cut evidence exists. In a review of a large database of patients undergoing PNL, it was found that in patients with negative baseline urine cultures, antibiotic prophylaxis significantly reduced the rate of post-operative fever and other complications. Single dose administration was found to be sufficient. These are the recommendations. Obtain a urine culture or perform urinary microscopy before any treatment is planned. Exclude or treat urinary tract infections prior to stone removal. Offer perioperative antibiotic prophylaxis to all patients undergoing endourological treatment. These are the combined contraindications of the procedures. Contraindications of ESWL. There are several contraindications to the use of extracorporeal SWL, including pregnancy due to the potential effects on the fetus, bleeding diastasis, which could be compensated for at least 24 hours before and 48 hours after the treatment, uncontrolled UTIs, several skeletal malformations, and several severe obesity, which prevent targeting of the stone, arterial aneurysm in the vicinity of the stone, anatomical obstruction distal to the stone. Contraindications of URS. Apart from general problem, for example, with general anesthesia or untreated UTIs, URS can be performed in all patients without any specific contraindications. Contraindications of PNL. Patients receiving anticoagulant therapy must be monitored carefully pre and post-operatively. Anticoagulant therapy must be discontinued before PNL. Other important contraindications include untreated UTI, tumor in the presumptive access tract area, potential mectic tumor, and pregnancy. Indications for active removal of ureter stones. Indications for active removal of ureter stones are stones with a low likelihood of spontaneous passage, persistent pain despite adequate analgesic medications, persistent obstruction and renal insufficiency, the renal failure, bilateral obstruction of single kidney. Selection of procedure for active removal of ureter stones. Overall, stone-free rates after URS or SWL for ureter stones are comparable. However, large stones appear stone-free status with URS. Although URS is effective for ureteral calculi, it has greater potential for complications. However, in the current endourological era, the complication rate and morbidity of URS has been significantly reduced. It has been demonstrated that URS is a safe option in obese patients, BMI greater than 30 kg, with comparable SFRs and complication rates. However, in morbidity obese patients, BMI greater than 35, the overall complication rates double. The panel performed a systemic review to assess the benefits and harms of URS compared to SWL. Compared with SWL, URS was associated with a significantly greater SFR of up to 4 weeks, but the difference was not significant at 3 months in the included studies. Ureteroscopy was associated with fewer retreatments and need for secondary procedures, but with the higher need for adjunctive procedures, greater complication rates, and longer hospital stay. Counterbalancing of URS, high SFRs, SWL is associated with lower morbidity. Clement-Indo-grade complications were, if reported, less frequent in patients treated with SWL. These are the recommendations. In patients with newly diagnosed small ureter stones, effective stone removal is not indicated. Observe patient initially with periodic evaluation. Offer alpha blockers as medical expulsion therapy as one of the treatment options for distal ureter stones greater than 5 mm. Inform patient that URS has a better chance of achieving stone-free status with a single procedure. Inform patient that URS has high complications rates when compared to shock wave lithotripsy. In case of severe obesity, use URS as first-line therapy for ureteral and renal stones. This is a treatment algorithm for ureteral stones if active stone removal is indicated. Greater than 10 millimeter, first choice is URS and SWL. Less than 10 millimeter, SWL or URS. For distal ureteral stones greater than 10 millimeter, first choice is URS and then SWL. Less than 10 millimeter, SWL or URS, both can be done. Indications for active stone removal of renal stones. Indications for the removal of renal stone includes stone growth, stones in high-risk patients for stone formation, obstruction caused by stones infection, symptomatic stones, stones greater than 15 millimeter, stones less than 15 millimeter if observation is not the option of choice. Patient's preference, comorbidity, social situation of the patients, that is profession or traveling, and choice of treatment. Selection of procedure for active removal of renal stones. Stones in renal pelvis or upper middle calyces, shockwave lithotripsy, PNL and RIRS are available treatment modalities for renal calculi, while PNL efficacy is hardly affected by stone size. The SFRs after SWL or URS are inversely proportional to stone size. Shockwave lithotripsy achieves good SFRs for stones up to 20 millimeter, except for those at the lower pole. Endourology is considered an alternative because of the reduced need for repeated procedures and consequently a shorter time until stone-free status is achieved. Stone greater than 20 mm should be treated primarily by PNL because SWL often requires multiple treatments and is associated with an increased risk of ureteral obstruction, colic or Steinstrasse, with a need for endorectic procedures. Retrograde renal surgery cannot be recommended as first-line treatment for stones greater than 20 mm in uncomplicated cases, as stone-free rates decrease and staged procedures will be required. However, it may be a first-line option in patients where PNL is not an option or contraindicated. Stones in the lower renal pole, the stone clearance rates after SWL seems to be lower for stones in the inferior calyx than for other intrarenal locations. Although the disintegration efficacy of SWL is not limited compared to other locations, the fragments often remain in the calyx and cause recurrent stone formation. The reported SFRs for SWL for lower pole calculi is 25 to 95%. The preferential use of endoscopic procedures is supported by some current reports, even for stones less than 1 centimeter. These are the recommendations for renal stones selection. Follow up periodically in cases where renal stones are not treated initially after 6 months. Then yearly evaluating symptoms and stone status, either by ultrasound, kidney, ureter bladder, radiography, or CT. Offer active treatment for renal stones in case of stone growth, de novo obstruction, associated infection, and acute or chronic pain. Evaluate stone composition before deciding on the method of removal based on patient history, former stone analysis of the patient, or HU, hospital units, on unenhanced CT. Stones with density greater than 1000 HU on non-contrast CT are less likely to be disintegrated by shock wave lithotripsy. Perform PNL as first-line treatment of larger stones greater than 2 cm. Treat larger stones greater than 2 cm with flexible ureteroscopy or SWL in case where PNL is not an option. However, in such instances, there is a higher risk that a follow-up procedure and placement of ureter stent may be needed. Perform PNL or RAS for the lower pole even for stone greater than 1 cm, as the efficacy of SWL is limited depending on favorable and unfavorable factors for SWL. This is a treatment algorithm for renal stones. If the stones are greater than 20 millimeter, first choice is PNL, then RIS or SWL. If the stones is between 10 to 20 millimeter, SWL or endourology can be done. If the stone is less than 10 millimeter, first choice is ESWL or IRS. Second option is PNL. These for the lower pole stones, if greater than 20 millimeter and less than 10 as above. 10 to 20 millimeters stones, unfavorable factors for SWL or endourology can be done or endourology. Now we will discuss laparoscopic and open surgery. Advances in SWL and endourological surgery have significantly decreased the indications for open or laparoscopic stone surgery. There is a consensus that most complex stones, including partial and complete Stockholm stones, should be approached primarily with PNL. Additionally, a combined approach with PNL and RIS may also be an appropriate alternative. However, if percutaneous approaches are not likely to be successful, or if multiple endourological approaches have been performed unsuccessfully, open or laparoscopic surgery may be a valid treatment option. Few studies have reported laparoscopic stone removal. These procedures are usually reserved for special cases. When expertise is available, laparoscopic urethral lithotomy can be performed for larger proximal ureteral stones as an alternative to URS or SWL. These more invasive procedures have yielded high SFRs and lower auxiliary procedure rates. A recent systemic review showed no difference in the post-operative phase for stented or unstented laparoscopic urethral lithotomy. A few studies with limited numbers of patients have reported using robotic surgery in the treatment of urinary stones. Open surgery should be considered as the last treatment option after all other possibilities have been explored. These are the recommendations for laparoscopic and open surgeries. Offer laparoscopic or open surgical stone removal in rare cases in which shock wave lithotripsy, retrograde or antegrade ureteroscopy, and percutaneous nephrolectomy fail or are unlikely to be successful. Just 2 slides are remaining.
Right.
Management of patients with residual stones. Following initial treatment with SWL, URS or PNL, residual fragments may remain and require additional intervention. Most of the studies indicate that initial imaging is performed on the first day or the first week after treatment. However, false positive results from dust or residual fragments that will pass spontaneously without causing any stone-related events might lead to overtreatment. As a consequence, imaging at 4 weeks seems most appropriate compared to ultrasound, KUB, and IVU. Non-contrast CT scan has a higher sensitivity to detect small residual fragments after definitive treatment of ureteral or kidney stones. However, more than half of the patients with a residual fragment of non-contrast CT images may not experience a stone-related event. It is clear that non-contrast CT has the highest sensitivity to detect residual fragments. However, this must be balanced against the increased detection of clinically insignificant fragments and the exposure to ionizing radiation when compared with KUB and ultrasound. In the absence of high-level supporting evidence, the timing of follow-up imaging studies and need for secondary intervention is left to the discretion of the treating physician. Recurrence rate risk is patient with residual fragments after treatment of infection stones is higher than for other stones. For all stone compositions, 21 to 59% of patients with residual stones require treatment within 5 years. Fragments greater than 5 mm are more likely than smaller ones to require intervention. There is evidence that fragments greater than 2 mm are more likely to grow, although this is not associated with increased reinvention rates at 1 year follow-up. Management of stones in patients with transplanted kidney. Stones in transplanted kidneys can either be transplanted or present de novo allograft stones. Usually they are detected by routine ultrasound examination, followed by non-contrast CT in cases of unclear diagnosis. Management. Selecting the appropriate technique for stone removal in a transplanted kidney is difficult, although management principles are similar to those applied in other single renal units. Additional factors such as transplant function, coagulative status, and anatomical obstacles due to the iliacal position of the organ directly influence the surgical strategy. For larger or ureter stones, careful percutaneous access and subsequent antegrade endoscopy are more favorable. The introduction of small flexible ureteroscopes and the Holmium laser has made URS a valid treatment option for transplant calculi. However, one must be aware of potential injury to adjacent organs. The appropriate access to transplanted kidneys is difficult due to the anterior location of the ureteral anastomosis and ureteral tortuosity. Treatment of donor stones may be needed pre-transplant and increases the pool available for renal transplants. Post-transplant stones disease may also need treatment to maintain the allograft function. A systemic review evaluating the outcomes of pre versus post-transplant URS demonstrated 100% SFR with an overall 7.5% complication rate compared to SFRs of 60 to 100% within an overall complication rate of 12.9% for post-transplant URS. Most complications were of Clavin window grade 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Very good. I must again congratulate Gulrez. Your presentation has been improved from your previous presentation, and it was comprehensive. It was complete. Very few areas are left. Always there is nothing called 100% coverage of the subject. There is always certain aspects which can be again looked upon. But
Yes.
but for the time being, and for anybody who wants to just revise the whole thing, I think this is something which is like 80% of the subject. What remains is individual points. For instance, PCNL, how it should be done, what are the different complications, how those complications can be managed. Similarly, what is the place of open surgery in an era of endourological procedure, whether it should be done or not, whether we should train our juniors for open surgery like pyelorrhizectomy, nephrolithotomy, anatrophic nephrolithotomy, or they should just be trained on endourology, for instance, doing URS, RIRS, or PCNL and ECIRS. That is one thing that is missing in your presentation also. But you see, every continent is a different continent. Geographical regions have got their different disease prevalences. Stone disease is something which is most prevalent in those areas which are actually part of Pakistan, and the rest of the world is also seeing it, but with a different kind of perspective. For instance, whatever the guideline is saying for its own target audience. And since it is the European guideline, so the European audience is their audience. What is our place? Since every technology is being evaluated and introduced in the West, we always look up to them so that they can guide us, they can give us something for our people. But as scientific community in our region, we have to take all those advances again with some reservation. By reservation, what I mean is we should think about them, whether they are needed in our people, needed in the sense that what is the kind of disease burden that we have, how they should be used. For instance, if you don't want to do an open surgery for a complete staghorn calculus, then you must be able to do a multi-track or multi-port PCNL. It cannot be, the stone cannot be cleared with one track. You have to put in multiple tracks because this is a complete staghorn calculus. So in order to follow something which is the West is doing, we have to devise our own strategy. Yes, there is some, or there are a lot of points for technological application, but we have to study those applications and the physics behind those technological interventions in depth, and then try to figure out where our place is. For instance, if we take a 2 centimeter or 3 centimeter stone and put it on an SWL, because the guideline is saying that if it is not treated by PACNL or something which a center cannot do, then the next best option is SWL. Now, for a 3 centimeter stone, if you put the patient on SWL, then it cannot be cleared in one session. You have to repeat sessions after sessions after session, and that is what is happening in most of the centers in Pakistan also, because since the guideline is saying that you can't do anything on another front in any other way, then there is only one thing that is left, and that is SWL. So I think that we have to think a lot, and we'll be thinking a lot in very near future. Now, before we go to the next presenter, I want to ask you something. I'm not sure whether you have been introduced through the subject of biostatistics in your foundation period, and anybody can answer this question representing others.
Yes, we have.
You have? So
Yes.
so how much do you understand and confident about biostatistics? Because if you have been through biostatistics and all the modules that have been exposed, that have been read through by your seniors in other MS groups, previous 2 MS groups, then I think we can move forward very early.
Sir, we had the basic knowledge of this subject in our MBBS because we did research in community medicine. So we were familiar with the terms and how to make the research and present this. But I think it's a difficult subject, and we actually didn't really focus on that during our time here. So I think with a little more guidance, we'll be able to do it.
Right. So, are you introduced to SPSS version, how it can be used for your research?
Yes, sir. We have taken that in our laptops as well.
Right. So, in the past 3 months, in your from last December to March, when you did your exam, there were any courses or any lectures from our department, the biostats department?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, they were.
Right. So anybody can just forward me if you have got those, just the topics, the name of the topics, the areas that have been covered a little bit, so that I must know whether you are geared up for the next step of your training or not, or you need a refresher from the same department and the same subject.
Okay, sir.
Right. So just tell me whether you need a refresher. Refresher means a revision of the biostats, a few lectures, maybe 1 month, 2 lectures a week, and that can solve the issue, or you don't need it.
Sir, we need
Well, we do need it.
You do need it.
Yes, sir.
Right. So I will talk to the department. Dr. Naqi Zafar is heading the department, so I will talk to him, and then when you come back on the 1st of June, then we'll do something, because this is a very a necessary step before you write down the synopsis or even think about it, because the purpose is to give you confidence in putting down the methodology. You see, what I'm talking about is the next step of your training. and I'm now thinking in terms of taking you along the next few months, maybe the next 6 months. So what I'm proposing right now is from June till December perhaps, you must be able to have a discussion with your supervisor, which we will give you the names who will be your supervisor, and that discussion will always be between you two. That means you yourself and the supervisor. You can have me as a catalyst, since I have been through all your presentations and I'm seeing and listening all along. So I've got my own input. So I can only guide you. I cannot be the master of everything, but there are masters of the subjects also. They have got their own special interest. So first, what I'm proposing is to go through the biostats first, maybe 1.5 month. During the whole process, you will be in our rota, part of the rota. What the rota is, maybe you are posted one day in the clinic, the other day in the theater. So everything is starting from June. The life will become a little bit difficult for you in the sense that you have to read a lot again, think a lot, devise your strategy of research, and then doing your clinical work. So as they say, it's like 80% of the work that is routine in clinical practice. So what you do is day in and day out the same thing. What the rest of the 20% is something which is special for everyone, and that special is actually your own impression which you get from the patients, your clinics, the procedures, the theaters that you will be doing, and then your lateral thinking, what you read in the articles, in journals, if you want to. Now, there are certain people who want to read throughout their life. There are certain people who don't want to read, but they are supposed to read within a certain period of time, and that is these 4-5 years that you have right now. So whether you are into the process intentionally with your heart or not, but you have to read. I think that's a must for everyone. So but what I'm suggesting you right now is you have got 2 weeks or maybe another 1 month also. Just think about your own research topic. You can be guided by a lot of sources. For instance, internet. For instance, if you come back, you can go to the library, delve into the journals, look what way is actually the whole world is going, and whatever research topic that you select, it should be from yourself. It shouldn't be entirely from your supervisor or perhaps myself. What I have given you are certain topics of urology. This is not the whole urology. Maybe 75% or 70% of urology is being covered. The rest 30% is still left. Maybe those 30% of urology is something which attracts you. So you must come up with your own idea, because whenever the idea is of your own, then you always first you own it. Second, this is your liking, or which you may call your baby. And the third thing is, it is very easy to work on it because it comes from your own heart. So rather than thrusting on you something, don't give that much of a space to me or anyone. Otherwise, what we are actually doing, for instance, I'm also answerable to someone. So whatever I'm telling you right now and whatever I will be telling you, it is actually being reported. So there is always a time limit for me to do something. If you don't do something from yourself, then I will make you do it. So don't allow me to make that kind of effort. I don't want to do something, pose something, thrust something on someone. That's not my idea of living my life. But please do your work, be your own master, and guide your own self. You can take advice from anybody, any senior person, and your supervisor also. Be in discussion, but it has to be from yourself. Again, I'm repeating myself again and again, because this is something which is lacking in our system, in our society. For instance, आप किसी बच्चे से पूछें क्या बनना चाहते हो, तो वो बच्चा खामोश होता है, इसलिए कि उसने ख्वाब देखना ही नहीं शुरू किया. उसे किसी ने कहा ही नहीं कि देयर इज़ समथिंग विच इज़ कॉल्ड अ ड्रीम. हमेशा ये बताया गया है कि जो ख्वाब देखता है वो उसके बाद कुछ और नहीं होता, वो सिर्फ ख्वाब देखता है. ऐसा गलत है. मेरे ख्याल में एवरीथिंग स्टार्ट्स फ्रॉम एन इमेजिनेशन, इट स्टार्ट्स फ्रॉम अ ड्रीम. इफ़ यू डोंट ड्रीम, you are not actually doing anything. You are not conceiving anything. So it has to start with a dream. So you must dream a lot. So I always prefer someone amongst a lot of people, one who is having some dreams. So this is something which is kind of a romantic sort of a statement, but this is what life is. So please think about it before you join us, and then we will have a lot of discussion, particularly with your supervisors also. I think the next step, as you are suggesting me right now, is to do something about research methodology and biostats. So we'll do it. So if we have got yes, please.
Sorry, sir. Sir, is there any platform where we can get information that the SIUT is focusing on, or where Pakistan is focusing on your subject? Any platform where we can get any idea?
It can be from something indirectly, and that is if you go to the library DME, for instance, they have got a long list of the dissertations and the topics on which theses have been written. So it's a long list. It's a list of like maybe 60-70 different topics. So you can see those topics which have been done in the last 10 years, right? And then that would give you an indication that what is possible. Because if somebody wants to do something which is not possible means you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the laboratory backup for that kind of a work, clinical work. You don't have enough patient sample for your research to be done, then it cannot be done. So whatever you suggest, it should have two things. One, patient population, that is the sample, the research sample. The second is, again, the infrastructure. It should be available, because anything that is not available, then it can be done, but then you have to wait for that thing to come into the system. We have to buy something, for instance, some reagent or some equipment. So do something which is already present. Now, since you are new to the system, so you might not be able to know what are the things that can be possible. Now, your supervisor is the one who is helpful in that aspect. You can ask me also, because I know what are the things that are possible and what are the things that are not possible. But I can assure you, all of you, what other centers can offer, SIUT can offer better. We have got better equipped laboratory, better repertoire of procedures. As Gulrez was pointing out, that in terms of surgeries, now starting from ESWL till robotic, everything is being done here. Maybe in a lesser say numbers, but it's the only center that has got the robot. So our experience is varied. It might not be, for instance, in one area. It can be expanded to different areas of the same subject. So please come up with your suggestion first, and then we'll discuss it whether it is possible or not. But don't just put everything before and then you start coming up. Otherwise, the whole process will become difficult for you. So please come up with some suggestion. It is not for instance, if you suggest one thing, then this is not necessary that it can be done. Maybe it is rejected in the first instance, or it is modified a little way, in a different way. So research is something where subjects are taken up and dropped many a times. So that's why I'm assigning 6 months, the first 6 months of your next phase of life, for just researching the topic. You are not starting your research, you are just researching the topic. You go to the library, you go into the books, you start something very childish. No matter people, for instance, if I think you are Mohsin, you have asked me this question, that whenever you say something that you want to join pediatric urology, so people start laughing at you. But that is the point where actually your success lies, because they don't see what you see in pediatric urology, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay.